And good afternoon, everyone. Hi, I'm Tina Brock, your host for Into the Absurd, a virtually existential dinner conversation coming to you today from some wonderful place in Austria that looked very inviting and a place that I would want to be. And Erica Holscher and Bob Schmidt, who are working on the show, who make the show happen every week. Erica points out to me today, and did you notice there's no people there? And that somehow seemed like a wonderful place maybe to just take a rest and have today's conversation with Dr. Lisa Grunberger. So thanks for being here. If you're coming in on Facebook Live or if you're joining us from anywhere in the world, thank you for being a part of this conversation. We have so enjoyed talking to you almost every Saturday for the last year, and it is a joy and a pleasure to stay in communication with artists and creators in our community to find out what they're thinking about and to talk about the ways that we're making it through a very existentially challenging time. So to that end, we hope you'll put your questions and your comments in the chat today for Lisa Grunberger, who I got to know, I got to know very recently, but we sort of had association with each other's work over a long period of time. And I'm super excited to talk to her about the many ways in which our lives intersect. She is an author of 3 books. She's a Pushcart nominee. She is a Temple University professor. Her writings have been read in the New York Times. She has a play about infertility, assisted reproductive technologies called Almost Pregnant. It is in development now, and we're going to talk to her about that. So let's get Lisa Grunberger to the picnic table today here in some remote part of Austria and have a conversation.
Hi,
Welcome.
Hi, B. Gates. My father was born in Vienna, so this must be kismet.
Well, when I was doing my research, that was on my mind. So when I went to search for images, that's where I started. So I thought it might make you feel a little bit at home or give you a little bit of a connection to the past. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. This is so much fun. And it's been so great to get to know you and as another creative woman artist in Philadelphia.
Well, isn't it amazing how exciting to meet someone where you share these intersections that maybe you previously, and I'm speaking specifically of Almost Pregnant, your book Almost Pregnant, but your play Almost Pregnant. Well, let's talk about Almost Pregnant, but I'm thinking about sometimes we go through life and we feel like we're the only person. We know that's not true, but sometimes it can feel very isolating. And then to have a conversation with you and to find out about this play you've written, it really made me so excited to hear about its development. So I want to ask you, what was the impetus for writing the play?
Well, I don't want it to sound like it's completely based on personal experience, but certainly when I was going through my own infertility, I was taking notes. I've kept a journal since I'm 9 years old, and then I started writing a book about it called Infertility: A Quirky Primer, and it was like A through Z with a different letter of the alphabet of just funny vignettes. There was one for Barbara Streisand, there was one for, zygote, there was one, for wine, because there's a lot of wine involved when you're going through, you shouldn't, you're trying to calm your nerves. There's all kinds of stuff. And I wrote the book and I sent it out to agents, and one lovely agent in Manhattan wrote me back saying she loved it, she's going to pass on it, but it sounds so theatrical, maybe you should consider it for a stage performance. And so that started the idea of the stage. So I adapted it, and it became this one-woman show. And we started working on it, and there was a little space in Old City where there's a Jewish art center in Old City on 4th Street, and they gave me the space, and I got a director, and then everything sort of came together. There's 2 women started this Art of Infertility, and ART is the acronym for assisted reproductive technology, and it happens to be art, right? Mm-hmm. So the play on that, and I started to work on it, and realizing in the process of rehearsal that it wasn't a one-woman show. I was going to have like 2 puppets, and the puppets were going to be sort of my alter egos and we used, it was really fun. We used, when you do the pregnancy tests, we use the pregnancy test for puppets. So I had a puppet in either hand, and we were playing. That's what theater artists do. We play. And I realized, oh no, these puppets really should be people, full-blown people. And as I'm wont to do, I'm a really avid dreamer. I dream a lot and vividly, and I remember my dreams and I write them down, and they often appear in my work. And I happened to dream, I said, I need to name these puppets. And I dreamt of Waiting for Godot. I dreamt of Beckett, and I immediately got up in the morning and looked up Waiting for Godot, and who are the characters but estrogen, female hormone, and lucky. You have to be lucky in the lottery of IVF and infertility. And I was lucky. I have a daughter. But I thought, this is beshert, which is a Yiddish word for like destined, meant to be. And those puppets grew into characters, and it grew into a show, and it developed at this little art gallery. And then we went on with my director, who's become a close friend, Hamutal Poslinsky. And we, through her vision, through really her dramatic and creative vision, she took my words and she made this really interesting play that was in the Philadelphia Fringe Festival, and now is going on to other lives and development in New York City. So, things start with a little seed, a little embryo becomes a blastocyst, or the blastocyst becomes an embryo, and artistic development. So, and then that's how it happened. Yeah.
I love the many connections between Waiting for Godot and the process of waiting, going through this process. And you spoke in one of your interviews about how strange it is to be sitting in an infertility waiting room. And of course, I know that place well. And I also, it was the setting for a play, that we discussed that I had written, which is the namesake of this company, Idiopathic Ridiculopathy Consortium, about a farce in an infertility clinic, slamming doors and wrong and samples, and you can imagine. And it does seem a little odd on such a somber and very difficult and topic that, that you would find, or that we could elevate what is just,
hard.
Right. Yes. But we talked before the show about how it is just surreal and otherworldly. And it does feel like you're waiting for Godot. You're just waiting for that 2 weeks, or waiting for that person to show up with the result, or waiting for that thing to happen that's so out of your reach. And I find that really fascinating that wove its way, that Didi and Gogo, Esther, Estragon and Vladimir became estrogen and Lucky, and how that worked. But I guess, can you speak to that a little bit? While Waiting for Godot wasn't the reason for doing it, but talking about how strange these waiting rooms, how surreal it is.
Absolutely. I haven't read your play, but when I saw, I've watched, this show, and I love your interviews, and I've gone to your shows, and I thought, this is a kindred spirit. You've written about it as well, infertility. And, if you don't, I think that, I forget who it was. I think Daniel Mendelsohn, the writer of Lost, Searching for Six Among 6 Million. He has a quote someplace that I've been thinking about a lot. And, you can either treat a story as a tragedy or as a farce, and I really, I think when people ask me to describe the show, it's both. There's a tragic element. And in fact, I've had people at committees, I won't name them, the Pew Committee, and I remember being around the table talking about the play, and people will say, well, this is just so horrible that you're treating it so lightly. My sister-in-law went through infertility, and and it's so lighthearted at points, and obviously not a kindred aesthetic, artistic spirit, because comedy is tragic, and tragedy is comic. They're two sides of the same coin. You have to laugh. You have to learn how to take your anxieties and sorrows with a little bit of a wink, or life is going to beat you, and in the original infertility primer, there is a section on the waiting room. I think it's under W. And it is this very surreal space where everybody's kind of looking at each other and wondering, like, a lot of things, the bubble over our heads, right? From the fake plans to the outdated parenting magazines to the snotty kid there that you want a child. In some places they don't let children in, and you're going to give blood. It's a vampiric space. You're going to give your bodily fluids, and it's a machine. It's a real study in the sociology of medicine, of what the machinery of modern medicine is. It costs a fortune. So on one hand, you feel really lucky that, oh, I can do this. I'm a white, upper middle class woman who can, or middle class, who can afford this, and I have health insurance and it covers it, thank God. On the other hand, you feel like, will I get lucky? Will this happen? So and then there's just your my quirky personality and yours. Obviously, we're drawn to looking at the world in this sort of weird, quirky way, and seeing the silver lining and just the larger picture, and then making use of that. You make use of your pain as an artist, right? You make use as an actress. I'm sure you make use of that, and of any pain you've had. My mom, who's passed away a long time, but she's always with me, and she always said, you have to learn how to make lemonade out of lemons, Lisa. And I think that really,
if you don't laugh, you'll cry. Yeah,
yes.
Mom used to just say that all the time.
Exactly.
You're not laughing, you're going to be crying, which is not a bad thing, but they're two sides of the same coin. And one does not negate the other. And
no, but I was told by a few people, on the committees and the judges, that it's, too lighthearted. I mean, it's like springtime for Hitler. I almost called it springtime for infertility, because there's some, there's a pretty harsh edge to it, to the play. And there's tenderness too, but there's a lot of jealousy of, I couldn't be in a room at a certain point with other pregnant women. And there's a scene where Becca goes to a Starbucks, and she sees the sort of cackling pregnant women already wheeling their carriages with babies, about to be giving birth again. And she breaks down, she's crying and she's jealous. And, you run the gamut of emotions when you're going through that. I went through it for over 3 years, through miscarriages, ectopic pregnancy, IVFs that failed, and you wonder how much you should keep going, how and when do you stop, when is enough enough. And that's what the play deals with too. You wonder, and you desperately want a child. It talks about adoption, the play, and luck and chance and destiny and fate, and am I meant to be, talks about the whole gamut. You have it. It's a petri dish of emotion. And, I've talked to people in Planned Parenthood about the play, and in Resolve is a really big national organization for helping women get pregnant. And a lot of people who are in that organization attended the play in its run at the Fringe Festival, and all positive feedback. So that was heartening. So yeah, but I'm happy that people can come out laughing and crying, and I people who are going through infertility and maybe after, but it's a really tender subject. It's and I don't know, if I hadn't been successful and had my daughter, I honestly don't know if I would have been able to write it, the book that became this play. I don't know. Who knows?
We talked about that a little before the show, looking back on a body of work, of the work that your plays, your fiction, the memoir that you're working on. Does the work select you, or do you select the work? As we're in the middle of it, I don't know that we know why do certain plays get selected for a season. I can give you the theoretical reasoning behind it, but it touches something much more fundamental that is processing inside of you as you're selecting, your choice. Do you have a sense of when you begin a project, whether it feels like it wants to be a poem, or does it want to be a play, or does it want to have a different form? Do you feel that inside, or does it just manifest and finds the form, the shape that it needs?
That's a great question. I started really young in the world of poetry, and I kept a journal. My mom gave me a journal on our first trip to Israel. She was from Israel, and our first trip, we're 35,000 feet above sea level, and my mom suddenly is different. She's like this different person. And of course, this was an era where you got dressed to travel. And I don't think she had her white gloves on, her Jackie Kennedy gloves, but she certainly was dressed and ordered, my mom, who didn't drink, a gin and tonic, and ordered me a tomato juice and reached into her bag and gave me my first journal and said, "You're a writer." And the reason I say this is I started to write poems very early on, and I'm actually going through those poems from the 70s and 80s and archiving and like changing them and using them for this memoir. But I come from that world, poetry, and I can't say it was a natural voice for me to write poetry and to hone that. It's a craft. You just, don't publish the first poem. But then from there, the theater world was a sort of dialogue, and that comes very naturally, reconstructing that, and humor, that comes more naturally. But I can't say, I know when a poem is bubbling up, like I think, okay, this is a lyrical voice and this is a poem, and then it's really short. It's a short sprint. They're short. But this book I'm working on, this memoir, that's like a monster right now, we can talk about that and what that is. That's not a natural form for me, come to find out. It's quite difficult. Short vignettes come out, short stories come out, but to try to find the arc of the character, and especially as a memoir, and I really just sort of have a love-hate relationship with memoir. So that has proven to be really difficult for me. And we've talked about that when we met over coffee, and how it's just making me crazy. So form is an interesting thing. I'd say I feel most confident in the poetry form in monologue. I've been doing a lot of Zoom monologuing. And two of my monologues have been getting some Zoom time. And but in terms of themes that recur, we've talked about that too, and they find you, right, the themes. And maybe it's because I'm going through old archives, and I'm adopted. I just did a genealogy test 2 years ago, and I found I was looking for my birth mother half-heartedly. It was really more to find grandparents or something. From my daughter doesn't have any grandparents. My parents have passed away. My husband's parents have passed away. She got off the school bus and she said, when she was 5.5, "Give me grandparents. I need grandparents. It's grandparents' day next month." And I thought, oh my God, I didn't plan for this. And so a lot of factors went into me doing this genealogy test. But what I unearthed was quite a story. And so the themes of my life, my father was a Holocaust survivor. I don't say adoptive father, my father, Robert, my parents. And then I found out that my birth father was also a Holocaust survivor. My maternal grandmother, who I discovered was a Holocaust survivor and a refugee, and my grandmother I grew up with was a Holocaust survivor. And it goes on. So those themes of Holocaust loss, intergenerational trauma of that, resulting from that, are now, I'm seeing patterns because I'm older, and you start to look back and see, oh, this is where I come from. And this is now, I have some books and some writing. So that's been really interesting, how to present it and tell these stories. So it's interesting to other people, and clear and entertaining is another story.
Do you think that the thread in there seems to be direction towards birth, rebirth, growth, discovery? And I wonder in which of those themes do those themes resonate?
I have to say no. It's not about birth and discovery and identity even. I'm not looking for my identity. I have, whatever shifting identity. Self-knowledge is kind of a farce. I know myself, I don't know myself. It's not what I'm interested in. I think identity, we're all riddles to ourselves, and we change all the time. I don't recognize my own writing or my own self in pictures. You hear your voice and you go, oh my God, that's me. Or I cringe when I'm watching myself on this video and going, my God, who is that middle-aged woman? And, you know, like, who am I? So I'm never interested. Those aren't my questions. I'm really interested in writing sentences that, as a writer, it's craft, right? It's, I don't know what the analog would be like for acting, but it's, you know, how to deliver that line, I guess, the inflection of a voice.
The technical aspects of it, the more technical, as opposed to coming from
a heart, or
like this feeling I need to share with you, or I need to communicate this experience. I need to tell you this story because it draws us together in a way.
I'm not wanting to do that. Yet there is a story to tell. And it's funny, when I tell the story, it's different than when I write it. So if I meet like somebody I know and I haven't seen them in a while, they go, oh, what's been going on? I haven't seen you. We've all been isolating. And I say, oh, I did this spit into a cup, and I found out my maternal grandmother was a refugee that Roosevelt led into the United States and was interned in a internment camp in Oswego, New York. And she gave birth to my birth mother. And as I'm hearing myself say it, it's such a good story. And they're like wide mouth, like you, they're like, whoa, wow, that you should write a book.
Well, but because here's what's interesting to me though, is, and when we met for coffee, and also listening and watching to you say that right now, it feels theatrical. I mean, in a very, in a theatrical, maybe too strong word, but it feels very felt, very, very experienced on your end, which is interesting to me, that that's the experience I'm having. Like, maybe it's the words you're choosing, and or the fact that the story is quite extraordinary, that leads my imagination to want to complete that story and to know more.
That's so interesting, right? And I've written about it, and I'm editing it now, and I'm trying to shape it. Maybe my perfectionism is kicking in, because I do have many pages, but what I found interesting though is that speaking it and telling it is really different. Oral narration with all that, like maybe emotion and dramatic delivery, and you know, and this happened, and then I went to Minnesota and found my birth mother's half sister, and it turns out we both write poetry, and we look alike, and we do these things, and we harmonize when we sing, and she, you know, and then all these, and I meet who I call my pair sperm, my birth father, in Manhattan, and he lived at, you know, in the theater district, and I used to pass by that building with my mother, and we used to eat at a restaurant when I went into Manhattan, because I grew up in Long Island, and I passed by his building and I met him, and he was very wry and funny guy. And so yeah, when I tell it, it's a great yarn, but then writing it is, I've learned so much about writing is a really different beast than speaking it. And I've thought, I mean, a friend of mine said you should just tell it and tape record yourself and try to get it here, but it doesn't work, you know, and I have a lot of it down. It's just a matter of now, you know, final sort of stages of more than, you know, probably another year of shaping it. And it's again, it's an aesthetic issue of you can't really tell a farce story. I mean, you could tell a farce about an adopted Jewish woman who's already the child of immigrants, who discovers that, you know, her nature and nurture side are these Holocaust refugees. And but I really want, you know, having come from the world of poetry and theater, I kind of want a commercial baby. I kind of want to give birth to I have a little bit of like my friend said, who is in academia, and he writes a lot, and he said, and he has 2 kids now, and we were in graduate school together, and he said to me, and he's writing a novel, and he said, I kind of want this to be my airport book. You know, I need to pay the bills. You know, he's like, I have a 3-year-old and a 6-year-old, and I realize I can't indulge in a lot of this esoteric. And I feel that way, that there's a bit of I don't write commercially, you know, and so that's another craft issue, that if you want to write with a commercial audience in mind. And I rarely write for an audience in mind, it just sort of bubbles up, like just with theater, right? Don't you think I need to sell tickets at the box office? So we need to have something I know audiences will come see, and then maybe a more experimental piece.
Right. Sure. Yeah. I mean, talking about one of our favorite authors, Kafka, certainly, I mean, there's a big audience for Kafka out there, but definitely when you're thinking about in pre-COVID, when we would think about our season and we had some sort of an idea of who our audience was and the kinds of works they would gravitate towards. Some years we would take a risk on Boris Vian, a poet, French playwright who hardly, and a musician who no one's work he really knew, wrote some beautiful plays. But you're right, you do have to fit, I think forming an absurdist theater company just by its very nature kind of defies the commercial,
yes,
which is not to say that great productions of Beckett and Ionesco that have been on Broadway haven't, because, there have been some. But I hear what you're saying. Do you think that having that in your mind is in any way making it more difficult for you to, you've got this constant like box office thing happening?
Yeah, I do. I mean, and I think it's hard to admit that in a way. I mean, but I think it's we write and we sing in different voices and we write in different ways. And I think that I definitely have more than one book that I've drafted. There's definitely two books and I have to kind of weed it out and sort it out. But I think there's going to be a more commercial book about a more straight up narrative about, that is funny too, that is about my discovery of my birth mother and birth father and a half brother and a half sister and an aunt and many nieces and nephews who live in Chicago and Minnesota, a whole family really, whatever that means. My daughter, it's funny, she's in it and she's become quite the character. She's 8 now. And she said to me 3 questions that drive the book, which I love. She said, because she hears me talking about it, she said, "Mommy, what's a relative? What is a relative?" 2, I have a picture of the Dalai Lama up in the kitchen, and I started to frame pictures of different family members as they've come into my life. So I had my birth father and I, a picture. I've had my father and I have this whole wall. And she turned to me, this is about 1.5 years ago when we first started, and she said, "Oh, Mommy, is the Dalai Lama my grandpa?" She was so confused about relatives because she figured what you value you hang up, on the wall. She's trying to figure out the relations of things. And that's in the book. Is the Dalai Lama my grandpa?
What did you say when she asked you that question? Is that a whole nother show?
Obviously no, but I also said and then she went on to Leon, my birth father, my pair sperm, I call him. And I don't think of him as my father or her grandfather either, which is another sort of twist in the book. When he introduced me, Leon, in his building in New York as his daughter, I kind of we went for coffee and I said, "I'm not your daughter, like you've had 3 kids and you didn't really raise all of them at all." And he was a kind of a wild, handsome, sort of Leonard Cohen, Bob Dylan, wild man. I mean, the war shaped him and he was very handsome and a womanizer. And he laughed at me and he said, "Oh, you're my," he sounded like Henry Kissinger. He had a German accent. And he's like, "Oh, you're my long lost poet daughter." Like very funny, very wry. He got me, and he understood, no, he's not my father, because that means you have to diaper a baby and support the baby and raise the child. My daughter's other question was, she's an only child, and she said, "Mommy, now that you found your half brother and half sister, are you still an only child like me? Are we still twinsies?" And the answer to that is yes. I mean, it's yes and no, right? So genetically, who knows, right? I mean, how many other kids he might have had? It could be like sperm donors today have 70 kids. Are they father to 70 kids? I mean, I think we have to kind of rewrite the vocabulary of genetic kinship, and anthropologists, I'm sure, are working on that as we speak. And part of the book is about that as well. How do we name things, and how do we assign names to things? Her other question was, I named her after my mother, Rachel. And she asked me why do we name people, at least amongst Ashkenazi Jews, after people who have died? What's the tradition there? So part of the book explores that transmission of a name and a memory in a name, because she said, "Doesn't it make you sad every time you say my name?" And I thought, no, it doesn't. It gives me great joy to say your name, but naming is very much part of the book. So I don't even know what your original question was, but
No, I don't either, but
yeah,
you know what? It
good,
doesn't, it really
good.
doesn't matter. We
Yeah.
went to
Oh,
Leonard Cohen
I
and far
know.
beyond. So yeah.
I know. You asked me about whether the commercial, my wanting it to
Right.
be a
Was
little
that, is the box
more.
office getting in the
Yeah.
way of that? What was the reason for, like, what was there, was there a personal searching that needed to be reckoned with?
Reckoned with. Yeah. It's funny you use the word reckon, because one of the, I'm still tossing around titles, and one was a reckoning, a woman, an adopted woman's reckoning with her genetic origins. I've dismissed that as a title, but I'm figuring that out, because I really didn't have, I have to say, a burning desire to learn about my birth mother. I assumed that she had died. I didn't know. And because I figured if she hadn't, she would have reached out somehow. That was my assumption. I'll leave you with a cliffhanger, whether she was dead or alive. You have to read the book. But it's a really interesting story. What happened was, the initial impetus was some curiosity. Was I got very nervous after what is her name? And Angelina Jolie had her breast removed. Do you remember that? A few years back, she had a double mastectomy, and she brought, God bless her, I mean, she brought this BRCA gene into the public consciousness. And I started researching that, thinking I don't know anything about my genetic history. And I got really scared about it, because a lot of my friends were getting cancer and different kinds. And I decided to do the genetic testing and for BRCA. But at the same time, I was doing the genealogy testing. I wanted to learn a little more of my medical history, because I was getting older, and I realized, oh, I'm not immortal. You reach a certain age, right? So that was part of it. And that I really, and my daughter really wanting more family. So much of our family was murdered. My father's was an only child, but most of his cousins and aunts and uncles were all murdered. And, and he didn't talk about it, at all. And so I was digging into, I really wanted to provide more possibilities for her, and it's worked. I mean, my brother's wife, Ellen, is amazing, and she shares her garden, pictures of her garden with Rachel, and they've become great friends, and it's worked on many counts. So it gives me so much joy. I can't tell you, Tina, to see that I have seeded something for Rachel, for the next generation. For her, for possibilities, because it's a hard world out there, and she is an only child. So yeah, it's a good story, and hopefully, I'll tell it in a compelling way, and without without fetishizing the Holocaust. I think there's a lot of Holocaust books out there, and it's really easy. Everybody's finding boxes and letters, and I have them too, and inheritances. And it's, I think, a very fine line how we handle the inheritance of loss, and of a great loss. So it's trying to find where the smaller story, the personal history, fits into the larger history, and how much can the general public handle a larger history, or you start to get bored. But that's been the challenge.
But I'm thinking, as you're speaking about the sort of commercial aspect of it, I always think, getting back to talking about making choices for plays and a season or whatever, but I do think hearing you speak about the many different twists and turns and things you're uncovering, and that those are just, I think, we all share that. It's not the same journey and it's not the same path, but obviously, but there are the curiosity of what brought us to where we are, and what is in my genes, that the gene of trauma or the gene of whatever happened, I think is commercial.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of faith you can have in knowing that the little bits that you're speaking about are films in and of themselves, I mean, in the sense of just how interesting I think they can be.
Thank you. Yeah, I think so. And I think there's a language of genes. I mean, we just finished, scientists just finished charting the genome, and it's amazing, right? And how much of nature, how much of nurture is always a question. And then not to even mention the whole field of epigenetics and how much the environment, both in the womb, shapes us and out of the womb. It's really quite a mystery. And scientists who are good are really humble about how much we know and how much we can know, like this epistemology about who we are. That's why I say I'm happy to be a riddle. It's really not a quest for identity. It wasn't so personal or burning, which counters a lot. I didn't feel as an adopted woman incomplete. I had amazing parents. I didn't feel abandoned. A lot of the book is about demythologizing these sort of cliches, I find. I mean, I know they're true. I'm going to step on a lot of feet here, but I know they're true. Those are true experiences for some people, depending on where they landed, in what family. But for me, and I think it's a number of reasons. I just had great parents. I got lucky, going back to almost pregnant. I just got lucky by a stroke of good luck and fate that my parents were really amazing people. My father was a survivor, and my mother was born in British Mandate Palestine. And she was an amazing woman. I describe her in the book as a kind of Golda Meir, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Dr. Ruth Westheimer, all wrapped up in one. She was a real package, moxie, short, but very intelligent, didn't have a lot of opportunities to be formally educated. But I'm a lot like her. And my daughter is. And so that's so interesting, even though I'm adopted. But yeah, genetic, absolutely. There's a real fascination with genetics and how much is transmitted and inherited. And it was interesting to see my eyebrows on my sister. I mean, like, oh my God, and my big front teeth, and to meet her children. And that was really interesting. And my aunt Gloria in Minnesota surprised me when I went. We took the whole family and we went to visit her before COVID in 2019. And she said, "I have a great surprise for you." I said, What? And in the party that she hosted for us, she put on music. And she said, "Close your eyes and just listen." And who am I listening to, Tina, but her mother, my maternal grandmother, my birth mother's mother, singing. She was a Parisian nightclub singer. And I'm hearing 30 minutes of her singing. She yodeled. She was from Switzerland. She sang in Italian. She sang opera. She sang jazz. She was like the Edith Piaf of the internment camp, apparently. And it was amazing. I have the CD, and sometimes I just, when I'm cooking dinner, using my mother's dishes, her china, I listen to Eva, and I talk to my mom, and I go, "Mom, this is my maternal grandmother Eva, meet my mother." And it's really moving. It never isn't moving to me. I know. And the book, the book is a little less emotionally driven, but it's amazing. Even as I'm telling it, I'm like, wow, yeah, she's great. Eva's amazing. She left an Orthodox Jewish family. And after she had her first son and her husband died tragically at like the age of 30, she was 32, I believe. And she just said, "I'm taking my boy." And this is in the 1930s. "And I'm going to Paris to be a singer, Daddy."
Wow.
She does that. And I'm really proud of her.
And that's there, right? That's in your.
Yeah.
So when you're writing, does it feel, back to this idea of like when you're writing, it's not an emotional exercise for you when you're putting the words down on the page. It's much more of a technical.
No, both.
Or is both?
It's both. When I'm first writing, it's many drafts. And when I first wrote it, it was more notes and, I just came back from Minnesota and, journaling almost. No, it's very emotional. And even as I was describing Eva and hearing her sing for the first time and meeting my family, it's very emotional. But the way I describe it is, it's like the emotion of, and then of course it's technical because you just want to chisel the sentences out so it flows and it's a beautiful story and it has structure and theme and arc and development and all those technical things, right, that we do in theater and on the page. the page is a little stage, right? It's a little canvas. But when I really can't say that, like meeting them, I met them all about a year and a half ago. And with some, I'm more close. With like any family members, you have your favorites, but it's very similar to like a romance. When you first meet a person you really dig, you go on a date, you see them for like 6 months, it's hot and heavy. You're like, oh my God, I have this great new person. And that's all you talk about. That's all your heart's filled with. And then it, peters out. And it had like, my relationships usually had like an 18-month lifespan, and that was it, and it was a good 18 months. So it's yet to be seen. That life will see who remains, what relationships remain, and what are just remain as remote family members who you invite to different weddings or whatnot. We are in each other's lives. So that's an answer. I mean, it's with some of them I'm more close, like we don't have the thing is I met these my family members at such a late date that, it's not during childhood where
Yeah,
you create primal memories and you go, oh, I remember
sure.
playing with you in my backyard, and I've learned that that's a really important thing. So maybe for my daughter with her new cousins who live actually in Austria. So my sister lives in Austria. So I just realized that she, and so, wow, it's there you are in your Austrian village.
We're here.
Yeah.
We're
So
here.
that's been interesting. My baby sister, so that's been, and I talked to her mother, who was Leon's wife at one point, and we've exchanged emails. So it's really been a fascinating journey to learn all this stuff, and but writing it is another.
We talked a little before the show about how it's hard. Writing is it's not something that necessarily for you, I think you were saying, like, it's not easy for me to do.
Yeah, it's not. It's I have a dear friend who's my daughter's Tia, and she I love her, but she said to me years ago, about 7 or 8 years ago, at a poetry reading, it's so good you have this writing hobby or something. And I'm thinking, oh my God, she doesn't, I love her, but it's not. It's it's not that it's, oh, my husband, he'll play the little violin and go, oh, the angst of writing, the poor romantic soul. It's not, it's just, it's a craft. Like, it's like practicing the violin or being an athlete. We just finished the Olympics, and you have to put hours and hours of craft, and
it's hard sometimes, right?
It's
Anything.
hard.
It's just you're grinding through some of it to get to that place of ease, or to place where the water flows again or whatever. And it's not all just, at least I don't, for any artistic endeavor, this free-flowing set of explosion of colors, words, ideas, emotion.
But it's I'm grateful to do it. And I writing this, and there was a lot of poems and monologues that were birthed when I had writer's block, when it came to the memoir. So I'm really grateful. You sort of let all the stuff flow through you and come out, and lots of short stories, lots of poems, lots of things. So it's been a really interesting, talking about it now. It's like, wow, this has been an interesting 2 years, but just the final stretch. And that's, so.
I also wonder about its possibilities for theater and/or film, So when you speak, and the stories seem to me to, I understand why theater is something that you gravitate towards, because they innately have a theatricality about them, whether it's the way you're telling me the story, or the fact that there's this unknown, factor about it that, that's true of any good story, but I think there's something inherently theatrical about you, about the way you see the world. And I think we talked about that, loving Ionesco, loving Kafka, but I want to, what's popping into my mind is your story, Ruthie, and the story about yoga.
Oh
the
gosh,
adventures of and
yeah.
I wonder if you could tell us a little about how autobiographical that is.
Oh, that was a book that's called Yiddish Yoga, and it's Ruthie's adventures in love, loss, and the Lotus Position. And that book came after my mom had died, and then my father died, and I was left in my childhood house and one alone with like 200 antique clocks. That my father was a not only an aircraft engineer, but on his side hobby he collected and repaired antique clocks, Viennese clock repairman. So my house chimed and sang, and that's also a big part of the book, because it's definitely a meditation on time and time lost, and so there I am in my house, and I turn the house one day, I move out all the furniture, pull up the rug, beautiful hardwood floors, and I turn it into a yoga studio and reinvent myself as a yoga teacher. And it had people coming in and teaching yoga. And then I left the house, sold the clocks, and I was living in New Jersey for a while with a boyfriend. And I started to tell him funny stories about my yoga clients. And there was one woman, she was 92, and she was my yoga client. I used to make house calls, and I used to do the final relaxation. She was this lovely little woman in the Five Towns in Hewlett Harbor in New York, in Long Island. And so she's this lovely woman, and I'm going, and relax and close your eyes and try to think and relax the space between your eyebrows. And I'm taking her through this whole journey of relaxation, and she looked up at me with the cutest eyes, 92, and she said, maybe you should tape record yourself so you don't have to go through this every day with all these people. And that was my first character, with Ruthie was born. And then of course I did have a dream where I was teaching yoga. And my mom came to me and she said, I just had gotten my doctorate in religious studies. And she came to me and said, for this, you got a PhD to stand on your head. And my mom, like, what are you doing?
Of
So
course.
I wrote these vignettes down and I sold the book, and now it's to Newmarket Press, and then Newmarket sold it to Harper Collins, and now we're in discussions to turn it into a musical theater piece with Ruthie, my widowed my 72-year-old widowed character who kvetches and stretches her way through yoga. And I'm really happy. I hope I hope it comes to fruition.
Oh, me too. I definitely think musicals about yoga pants and kvetching and all of that, I mean, would be so much fun to watch. I mean, that's inherently theatrical, right? Plus you're combining all of the great aspects of theater that pulls us all together, that sort of spiritual union, the idea of being in a church, loosely, the sort of religious aspect of all of this. It's totally made for a stage. A raked stage where which will be hard on the Ruthies, but
exactly, I think so. And so we're talking, I've had many conversations and over the years, and then COVID happened, so hopefully Ruthie will get her time to schwitz and twist and kvetch and stretch, but not in a campy way. That's the thing. I don't want it to be, just a kind of campy, like, here's a little old lady. I'm very intent on, she's a sexy power bubby, I really hate this kind of desexualizing older women, so all my characters who are older women, they're always sexy, and their life isn't over, they're there. And she after her husband dies, Ruthie goes on J-Date, the Jewish dating site, and she finds another love, and he wants to get married. It's a whole Yiddish folktale. And
was this really your client, or did you did you know this much about your client, or
no, I was teaching a lot at that time, a lot of yoga in the Five Towns in Long Island and in New York, and so I met, as you can imagine, many characters. And so it's a composite of, like, probably some of my mother, some of, like, other my friends' grandmothers who are just characters, and this woman, I forget her name now, my gosh, but she was 92, and she would show me her Jack LaLanne moves and always want to introduce me. I was single, so she had grandsons, and she'd always show me the photo albums and want to introduce me to all her grandsons. And it was
oh, that's fun. That's a fun act of the play. right? A
crazy.
fun act where the yoga instructor meets up with a, yeah. Do you think this is totally totally tangential, but do you feel that yoga was, well, I assume she was a very active woman anyway to even consider doing this.
Yeah.
But I do you see generally as yoga being really restorative and a good thing for people
Oh
of
yeah.
any age? Did you have a lot of older clients?
Yes.
Older
Yes.
meaning, it's all the state of mind, but
It's all a state of mind. No, I did. And yoga really, when my father died and my parents, they were everything to me. I went through a big, a long period of grief, and the loss of that was really hard for me. So there's a lot of me in Ruthie, to understand about grief. There's always a lot of grief and loss in all my writing, but absolutely yoga was very healing to me. There was a great teacher, Michael, at just a New York health club, sports club. And I used to go, like you said, like a church, every Sunday morning, we'd all go to Michael's class. And I felt very healed and restored by his language and his gentleness. And we became really good friends. And so I went on to do my teacher training, and I love yoga, and I still teach. I still teach a Zoom class on Sundays and mornings with some of those Long Island gals who are still
do
with
you?
me 20 years later. And we've all gotten older and grayer, and yet we're all flexible. We haven't shrunk, and we crack up most of the time. We're just so fun. And they've gone on to become teachers. They have come on. I mean, teachers when they're 50, 55, 60 to do their teacher trainings. And it's yoga's given me so much. I mean, I love yoga, and my daughter does yoga now. And so, the book, yeah, Yiddish Yoga is it's more of a folk tale, but Ruthie Ruthie finds a lot of healing. In fact, the instructor she has in the book, Sammy, is gay, but she's like, adjust me, Bubala, adjust me, because she likes him. So she always wants him to touch her. And they become really close friends in the book, and they're both looking for boyfriends. And it's a very cute little relationship they have. And so yeah, the Yiddish yoga is it's
I'd love to, yeah, I hope that it finds a musical
I do too.
home. Someone breaking out into song in yoga pants has to happen.
I
I
know.
feel like, do you as you continue to find new avenues for expressing your creativity, do you feel today in your life, how looking back on, say, the last 20 years of your work, your life, your world, what about today for you is can you point to something that feels intrinsically different about your world now
than 20 years ago?
Yes, like what is the thing about now that you feel defines you?
Yeah. Well, writing has always been like a consistent thing, but the difference is really being a mom, being a mother. And writing this book, it starts off as a search for the birth mother, this memoir, and it's taught me. I mean, writing always you write into the void, right? Writing is like, it's been described as like a hunter. You want to figure something out, and the story I'm writing is very much a detective story, right? I want to find Susan. And then, like Tina, like with infertility, I went through one IVF, no, another IVF, no, and then it becomes like, I'm an alpha woman, I'm not going to lose, I'm going to have a baby, right? And you're struggling again, you just want to win. There's a kind of I want to beat IVF, I want to beat infertility, and so that's always been the writing. But the book became a kind of spiritual search. I started to get very busy in my head with the writing and with my worlds and with COVID and with Trump. And I started to get feeling myself a bit falling apart at a certain point. And and then this teacher came into my life in California, and he wrote a book called Zen and Psychoanalysis. And I started to sit Zazen meditation. And I had sat before, and I do yoga, so I was not unfamiliar with it. But we just sat recently. So I sit with this lovely community on Monday nights, and I've been practicing and exploring this world of quiet meditation to quiet the mind, to center, to just find some sanity in a very chaotic world right now. You know, as you say in your introduction to this, we have a lot of unknowns, a lot of political things happening, and, you know, all these things. And it was really getting to me. And so it became a spiritual search. And I explained it this way to answer in a circuitous way your question about what's different for me now is that I can't quite find the answer in Zen, is that now I have these great times in my day where I set everything aside and I go to the park with my daughter, and I hear the squeals of these children and dogs in the park, and she's rollerblading and she's bicycling, and I'm making peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, and I'm so happy because I'm an older mom, and I'm just so happy being with her. She's healthy, she's happy, and I'm so blessed. I feel like I came late to all of this. I came late to my husband. I have a great partner, and I'm so grateful for that, because there were a lot of frogs, you know, and a lot of waiting, and a lot of tsuris, you know, a lot of problems, and a lot of grief, and a lot of loss. So I asked my teacher just on Monday, I said, well, how does Zen though? I've looked in on the park, where I've been the outside single woman through the fence, hearing that laughter, wanting to be that mom sitting on the bench, and I've been inside it. And I tell you, it's better to be inside it. And so, like, it's like saying, I have a dear friend who has cancer now, and I have a friend who's, you know, it's like the old adage, it's as easy to marry a rich man or a poor man, you know, I mean, or it's better to marry, you know, there's qualitative differences. And I'm still struggling with that, you know, my life I'm really blessed right now with a really lovely home. And I didn't have that from a lot of my life. I was really looking in and saying, you know, when's it going to start? But now being a mom is great.
Yeah. When's it going to start? It's always a phrase that you hear people say, or I've certainly experienced that for many years in my life. Being a bit of an outside observer in your own life, and wondering when that life will fully inhabit you, so that you can own it, you know, and be in it, be in it, as opposed to looking on the outside. It is interesting, is it not? How, and I wonder to the degree that your daughter, it sounds like that was a major life event that allowed a lot of this to coalesce, but how something as chop wood, carry water, as making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, or looking at a flower, or, you know, you hear these all your life, stop and smell the flowers. And it's like, I'm trying, you know, and you kind of think you're smelling them, but, you know, on some level you're probably not, but you're sort of there. And then it starts to gently, slowly, piece by piece. Oh, that's what it is.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah.
And do you think that so more of your life is about that right now, that is those kinds of moments where it's like, oh, okay.
Yes.
I see. Absolutely. Now.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think I'm really lucky. I think a lot of it came together. I love teaching. I teach at Temple, and I love my students in those relationships. I'm happy to be on sabbatical to finish the book, so it's balance. But it really is truly being in that moment, and being with, you know, you only have your kids, you brought them into the world, and certainly with infertility, we wanted them, really. It's not oops, it's intentional act. So being an intentional parent and putting down the cell phone, putting away the work, and saying, you know, I'm going to be with you in the next, you know, she's 8, I'm going to have her for another 10 years, and then boom, she's in college. So I'm very conscious and aware that as much as every day is a struggle and a balance and a juggling act for working parents and working moms, artist moms, you know, it's really important to shut down and do one thing. I try to teach her to do one thing and not multitask, right? And I think we try to do that in our house, but I'm still struggling with, you know, of course, the questions of suffering and not having what you wanted, and how do you reconcile that? I'm so lucky in my life, gratitude, but it's life is hard. Life is a tightrope walk, and it's I think it was my husband loves to quote to me things. He's a scholar of religion, and he said, I think it's Rebbe Nachman said, life you go over a bridge, and the most important thing is not to be afraid. Don't be afraid. Don't, because I fear a lot. I have a lot of Jewish angst.
Oh yeah,
Don't be afraid, Lisa. I fear everything, and we live in a world of fear. So I use it. I turn it into humor. Because fear, Woody Allen, you convert it into to jokes and fun, but underneath the humor is always anxiety.
And just, well, it's just said so often, and we feel it every day, the sort of constant changing
yes.
place that this world that we're all in, that feels like it's going to continue to be a version, which is not to say there aren't amazing and beautiful things happening, but it's certainly a lot for a lot of us to get our heads around and to figure out how to manifest and manage in that
Absolutely.
place. I love the bridge metaphor. I was driving yesterday over, I forget which one it was. It might've been going into Brooklyn. I can't remember, but I have kind of a really fear of bridges, and I'm driving by myself and I'm like, just breathe through this bridge, just breathe. Right. And as soon as I did that, I was like, the bridge, we're just in the middle of the air, it's fine,
Oh my God.
So, but I will remember that the next time I am driving over a bridge and being scared of some irrational thing. That's a whole nother show we have to have, the show about fear.
Oh, sure.
It just comes up in the conversation every day, and it's something that we're all just doing it one step at a time.
We are.
Well, I would love to continue and make this a dessert conversation. Lisa, we're at 6 o'clock, and I want to give everybody a chance to have their Saturday. It's been my pleasure to talk to you about your projects. I can't wait to see where they all go.
Thank you.
I'm so excited for the work you're doing for all of us here in Philadelphia. Your work as a mom, as a professor, as a poet. It sounds like you are just really exploding into it, and it's really exciting to see. So thank you for coming on and sharing it with us.
Thank you so much, Tina, really. And I love your work as well. And really, thank you for giving me this opportunity. And we'll continue to talk. And
oh, it's my pleasure. We'll have you back to talk about which the memoir or the musical, whichever happens first. Maybe we should just make that a date. Be like, okay, you have to get that memoir done, because
I'm going to.
We'll schedule the show to make sure.
Please do that.
I'm your writing coach.
Do that.
All right, we'll do that. Very good. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
And thanks to all of you for being here with us today. And I hope that you'll be here next Saturday when Ari Benjamin Bank joins us here at the ITA dinner table. Ari is a professor at the Community College of Philadelphia, where he teaches classes designed to enhance empathy levels in his students. He is an activist for human rights and animal welfare. And recently he made a bid as an independent presidential candidate in 2020. We're going to talk about his mockumentary that came about as a part of that process. And we'll also talk about, what he's doing in the community, his work at community college. And you probably also know Ari if you've been to any shows that his lovely wife, Kirsten Quinn, has been in. Ari is always there, a super supportive advocate of the theater and of Kirsten. And I can't wait to talk to Ari about his work and as an activist and on his mockumentary. So we'll talk to Ari Benjamin Bank next week here on Into the Absurd. And from Erica Holscher, Bob Schmidt, and myself, wishing you a very safe and a very healthy and happy week ahead.